Hi everyone, welcome back to Adonai, a chronological study of the Old Testament. I'm Kimberly Constant, your host, and we are well into the story of King David. We are at the point in this Bible study where now it's going to get fun and interesting as we try to continue through the Old Testament in chronological order. So we are going to be bouncing around. So pay special attention to the last slide. If you're able to view the presentation, I'll also say it aloud when we get to the end, but I will call out for you the reading material that each lecture covers. And then, of course, you can always visit my website, kimberlyconstantministries.com, and there you will find on the Bible study page, click on Adonai, a study of the Old Testament, and you will see the weekly modules laid out for you, along with, when you click on each reading assignment, it will take you to that page on Bible Gateway so that you can read it right there on your computer, on your tablet if you want to. You can also have it audio and read to you, which I always recommend listening as well as reading if you're able. So just a heads up, we're going to be bouncing around, and I think it's going to be fun and interesting as we piece together the various perspectives that we have on some of this time in Israel's history. So today we're going to talk about David's battle for the throne. So this will be 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through 10, as well as 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 5 verse 5, and that's where it stops. So let's dive in. So the beginning of David's reign is quite a contrast with that of Saul. Saul's reign, if you remember, we talked about in the last series of lectures, began with great promise and pretty much solid support. David's, on the other hand, will begin with controversy, with a very much divided kingdom, which we will get into here, and with his continued threat posed by the Philistines. So at this point in the story, if we didn't know this is our first time reading through it, and I hope that there are some of you out there that is true. That's so amazing. So at this point in the story, you might think Israel's doomed. But for the fact that we know from 1 Samuel that David is called a man after God's own heart. He is very dusty and human, and that dustiness will increase as we read through the rest of his story. But he also consults God. When David does something wrong, he's willing to humble himself and repent. And he seems to genuinely care about the people of Israel. And I think that really comes through, especially in the earliest part of his reign. Now, we will see in David's story that he will lose his way at times. It's extremely difficult for a human being with as much power as David had, or any of the kings of Israel, to not lose their way at some point in time. We will see that David's children will cause him great heartache and distress, but in the end, David will be spoken of as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, kings in all of Israel. So if we look at our timeline, which we tend to review from time to time, we are finally getting into a more reliable timeline where history and historians and scholars come together and say, yes, this is the time in which this person lived. So Saul and David are right around 1025, 1005 that their reigns begin, and that this story takes place. So again, if you're looking at this slide, you'll see under the United Monarchy, Saul, David, and Solomon. So let's do a quick review by way of new material. So we're starting here in Chronicles. Normally, Chronicles comes at the end, towards the end of your reading of the Old Testament. But here we're going to have it be first, because these 10 chapters recap in a very high level way, in a very genealogical way, everything that has happened so far in Scripture. So first, let's talk about what 1st and 2nd Chronicles are. Why is history restated? Why do we need this? Why can't we just have the history that's in Samuel and Kings and call it a day? Well, often, and you may know this to be true, whether you've done Bible studies before or not, Bible stories will be repeated for different purposes or sometimes from different points of view. We've actually already seen that in the story of Moses' call back in Exodus in the very first chapters. You saw the Moses' call story at the burning bush, one of those famous stories from scripture. And then we had a second version of Moses' call story where he kind of questions God and says, I'm not up to the task. And then they give a little bit of a genealogy. So this happens a lot, just a different perspective or a different purpose in mind that changes the choices that an author will make. Pause here just to consider that in the whole story of what God has done in humanity, there are multiple stories that have gone, without being put into the Bible. We know this to be true in our own lives. God works in our own lives. We have our own stories to tell. God is always at work, everywhere, all the time, working all things for good. And they couldn't possibly fit every single story about every single person. In addition, in the old times in which this was written, they are writing on papyrus scrolls. They only have so much room, so they have to edit. What are we going to include about a person's life? Typically, there was not a lot said about their birth, just enough to kind of give you background. A lot of would typically get focused on their death because that was a way for someone to gain honor, depending on how you died. It depends. Saul would not have that case since he had to fall on his own sword. And then the middle part, and typically it's the biography of a person would have focused on their public life. And so for David, for Saul, for Solomon, when we get to him, even for Samuel, that comes when they become anointed and they become one of Israel's leaders. So I don't even remember where I was going with this, but anyway, so for different purposes, different points of view, we're going to see different parts of these stories. And this is true, by the way, into the New Testament. We have the 4 Gospels, all of which are telling the same basic story of Jesus' life, but each gospel writer has a different purpose in mind, potentially a different audience. And so, that's what I was getting to when I was talking about David's life. It changes what stories you're going to include. If I was going to write an autobiography of my own life, I would have certain stories I'd want to include. But perhaps if my mom or dad wrote a biography or one of my children, they would pick different stories that, there are some things that only I know of myself. There are some stories that only my mom knows and was present for. There are some that only my kids know and were present for. And so we always are making choices. What stories are we going to include? We cannot, even in modern day times, have a biography that encapsulates every single moment about someone's life. So there's always editorial decisions to be made. That's what happens in the Gospels. It also happens in the book of Acts. In that book, we have 3 different versions of the Apostle Paul's call story. And so this is true of the material in 2 Samuel through 2 Kings. That's one sort of editorial group. And then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, a different group of editors, writers, and they each have different purposes and they come at you from different points of time in Israel's history. So most scholars believe that the books of Samuel and Kings were written during the time of the Babylonian exile. We will get to that period of history soon enough. And so the scholars believe that 1st and 2nd Chronicles were written after a remnant of God's people returned to Jerusalem from Babylon. So potentially something like 500 years is separating the completion of the Samuel King's history and the writing of 1st and 2nd Chronicles history. So the purposes are different as well as the audiences, and you're going to see that show up in tone and in content. The books of Samuel and Kings, in particular, address the sin and disobedience of Israel's leadership. That led the nation astray and resulted in their exile. So if you can imagine, they're in Babylon, they're far from home, everything has fallen apart, they have lost their kingdom, they have lost the temple. They are trying to look back in time and say, how did it all go wrong? How do we explain this? And how do we make sure this never happens again? And so the tone you're going to find is a bit harsher. It's a bit more negative in general. They're meant to explain the how and why of Israel's fall from grace. And so in Samuel and Kings, the authors don't hold back from explaining the sin of Israel and God's judgment of that sin. Now, the books of Chronicles are a little bit less negative. They seem to have been intended to offer a more uplifting version or account of this time in history, and they focus more on the positive elements of the time of Israel's kings. You'll really see this to be true in David's story. It's kind of ... They leave out all the bad things and skip ahead to the next good part of the story. And that's not to say that it's all roses. They can't get around some of the negative things that happen, because obviously there was a lot that happened that led Israel to be taken into exile. So they can't get away from it entirely, but they certainly don't lay it out in as much gory detail as Samuel and Kings. These books will also emphasize mainly the reigns of David and Solomon. Those are going to be over half of the material. And the rest of the kings are going to be truncated. Not every king is going to be talked about, unlike 1st and 2nd Kings, where you do get a little bit more insight. Now, David's still a huge part, Solomon as well, huge part of the story of Samuel and Kings, but in Chronicles, it's even more so. So they want to emphasize this because David and Solomon are the ones to establish the capital of Jerusalem, to put walls around that city. David's going to be the one to bring the ark to Jerusalem, and Solomon's going to be the one to build the temple. And that's kind of the foundation of Israelites' ancient religion, is temple worship. And so 1st and 2nd Chronicles really want to highlight that time period, highlight Israel's worship and the importance of their status as God's covenant community. By the time people are coming back from exile, they are no longer a nation. They are no longer Israel, the nation. They are Israel, a religious group of people, a religious community. They're called the Jewish people. And so because of that, they're going to focus more on what do we have that's still us. We still have the temple because they rebuild it. We still have the ability to worship God. And so they're going to focus on that. So this is going to be interesting as we read through this period in Israel's history, which is a long period. We're going to interweave these two historical viewpoints together. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to get a fuller picture of what went right and what went wrong, and where God was in the midst of this nation's absolute downfall. So I'm excited to do this. I have never done this before, so I ask for all your grace and patience as we go through this process, especially if you're following me in real time. It might be there's a little bit of delay here and there some weeks because I am putting all of this together for the first time, which I love to do, but it does take me quite a bit of time to do that. So hang in there with me, and thank you so much for staying with me. And please feel free to give me your feedback. How does this go for you? Do I go too fast? Is it too slow? Is there areas where you wish I would speed up? Is there areas where you wish you had had more time to read? All your feedback is very helpful so that if I do this course again, I can tailor it with the observations that you have. Because again, this is new, and to my knowledge, I haven't come across, not that I've really tried hard to look for it, but something like this. So we're kind of treading new territory here, and I'm very curious to see how it goes. I don't want to go too fast. I also don't want to go too slow. So feel free to reach out with your thoughts and your comments. You can reach out to me through the website. So Chronicles opens with, I know you're so excited about this, genealogies, and they are selective. Here's where we start to see this positive spin on history. For instance, in the opening genealogy, there is no mention of Cain or Abel. They just kind of move from talking about Adam to the next person is Seth. So remember, Chronicles will have a more positive presentation of events. And the other thing is, the authors of Chronicles know that these other scrolls and books of the Bible exist. They know that by now the Pentateuch exists. Moses had already written that. It was formalized during probably this time period, actually, during the reign of King David and Solomon. They knew that someone had written the history in Solomon and Kings. Sometimes they'll actually reference it in a roundabout way. And so they know that they don't have to go into the gory, nitty-gritty details. That's there if someone is interested in it. Again, they're going to give a more positive presentation, really focusing on hopefulness and the continuity of God's covenant community. Even though the people got sent into exile, God's covenant community continues, and they want those returning to Jerusalem from Babylon to repossess their respective inheritances. So the genealogies become important. This is the link to what God has been doing. This shows that it's all plan A. God has been at work since the beginning, and these people, even post-exile, have a place in God's plan. It also helps them to know who comes from what family line. This is really important for the Levites. I'll talk about that in a minute. It just helps them to know, okay, I come from this family. I'm going to try to repossess this part of Jerusalem that family lived in. So we begin with what is called the record of the nations. This is 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verses 1 through 27. And we trace the line from Adam to Noah and Noah's sons. And Noah's sons become patriarchs of the various nations of that region of the world. So Japheth, his 7 sons, are believed to be the patriarchs of the people of Europe and northern Asia. Ham's descendants beget the populations of Africa and the Far East, and Shem's sons form the beginnings of the nations of Persia, Assyria, the people in Asia Minor, the Arameans or Syrians, and our Israelites. So here you might wonder, what about the rest of the world? What about the native people groups in the Americas, in North and South America? Why aren't they mentioned? Well, we have to remember that this is being written from the viewpoint of Israel. And at this point in time, they would have had no knowledge that North and South America even existed. The oldest civilization in the Americas is thought to be the Supe people, who lived in northern Peru from around 3500 to 1800 BC. So that's well before the time of King David. And the Mayans trace their early roots to around 2000 BC, again, well before the time of King David. So the question we might ask, did these ancient people descend from Noah? And they ended up spreading across the land and just, no one in the ancient Near East knew. Or are they pre-flood human beings? It's a good question. We don't know. Scholars estimate that the flood of Genesis might have occurred somewhere between 2500 and 2300 BC. So that means that the first peoples in the Americas, the Supe, I don't know if I'm saying that right, predate the flood. So it could be that they were people that somehow migrated across the ocean from Noah's families, his sons' families. Or it could be that they were peoples that were not impacted by what was happening in the ancient Near East. When the Bible talks about the flood, it gives us the impression that it's this worldwide event. So far, there's no indication from archaeology that there was any kind of worldwide flood. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. But for them, the world is the ancient Near East, and they know of nothing else. So they would write from that perspective. Kind of like, back in the day, people didn't know about the galaxies and the stars. They didn't understand the Earth's rotation, things like that. And so you write what you know until you know differently. So it could be that they were pre-existing the flood. The flood did not impact the Americas, and that perhaps their genetic code was not impacted by the events of Noah's time. Maybe they weren't intermingling with angels, and so God didn't need to wipe out what was going on. Or again, it could very well be that they somehow migrated across the ocean from the ancient Near East to form the peoples of the Americas. We don't know. But the reason they're absent in the Bible is because the biblical people did not know that they existed. God knows they exist, knew they existed. God is for all people. He is for the entire world. But this is a narrowed focus. We're getting the story of God's interaction in humanity and in time from the viewpoint of ancient Israel. And so it's a narrower focus than looking at the entire world. Food for thought, anyway. So the next section deals with the record of Israel's patriarchs. So this is the rest of chapter 1. So we go from Adam and Noah and his sons to Abraham, the patriarch of Israel, who begets Isaac, who begets Ishmael and Ishmael. Ishmael becomes the fathers of the Arabic peoples. Isaac becomes the father of the Israelites. And from his line, we have Esau and Jacob. Jacob's name changed to Israel. They call him Israel a lot in Chronicles. Esau fathers the nation of Edom. Jacob and Israel fathers the 12 tribes who will become Israel. So the next section opens with the record of the 12 tribes, and it gives us a detailed genealogy of the 12 tribes, because here is where people that were going back from exile are able to place themselves according to their original inheritance. The first tribe to be explained in detail is Judah. This is unusual because Judah was not Jacob's firstborn son. His firstborn son was Reuben. So normally we would start with the firstborn, but Judah is the tribe from which King David descends. And also, spoiler alert, the tribe from which Jesus Christ will come. So it's given prominence because of David. And so again, this is a very David-focused book, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And so they are prioritizing his line. And note that as they go through David's line, they will divide the later generations by pre- and post-exilic families. Again, to show those people returning from exile, hey, you're still a part of this. You're still part of God's work in the world, and you're a part of the Davidic line and the tribe of Judah. You also might note that there is an absent tribe, the tribe of Dan. Why? Well, we haven't gotten to it yet, but we will pretty soon here. They're going to be the first tribe to introduce large-scale idolatrous worship into God's holy land. And it's going to be pretty egregious. So that is why they are absent. Or scholars say there's like one kind of line where they think it's referencing Dan as like a throwaway, but it's not even the name of Dan. It's some other name, just kind of like, we can't talk about those people. They're the black sheep of the 12 tribes of Israel. In the midst of all of these names, we get a few verses that are pretty powerful, and they're called the prayer of Jabez. This is in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 through 10. So, as you're reading, feel free to skim all of these names. It's a lot of names. We don't know how to pronounce them. If you want, here's where you might try listening so that you can at least hear the names being read correctly. Even I butcher them. My Hebrew is only as good as I can conjure up the accent, and then that's not always easy. So, but here's where you could hone in. Just if you read anything, go look at these two verses. Amidst all these names, we get these verses about a man named Jabez who is said to be more honorable than his brothers. His name is interesting. It means he causes pain or sorrowful. And we learn that this is because his mother had great pain during his birth. Indirectly, we surmise that the reason the Bible is saying he's more honorable than his brothers is because of the relationship that Jabez has with God. He appears to be a praying man, and he prays to God and asks for God to bless him and enlarge his territory. That is such a great prayer to pray. We can all pray that, because that's not just talking about physical land that we own. It's talking about, for us, it could be spiritual territory. Enlarge my territory. Give me, help me to have a greater impact for your kingdom. Bring more people into my sphere of influence that I can tell about you, God. It's a cool prayer. I like it. And then he also prays for God to be with him and keep him from harm and pain. Now, this may seem like a pretty straightforward prayer, but in the Hebrew, what you understand is that he's actually praying that he would not be the cause of pain. So keep him from causing pain might be a better translation, or from causing harm. Because of his name, names meant so very much in the ancient Near East, and your name said so much about you. And so to bear that name would be to bear, a burden. It was a burdensome name. And I'm sure everywhere he went, it was like, ooh, your name causes pain. We don't want to be friends with you. And so he's asking that God would redeem that and help him to not cause pain. And so it's so precious and beautiful that we read in verse 10 that God granted him what was requested. So his territory grew and he didn't cause people pain. So just a cool little snippet there that's so easy to pass over, because if you're like me, those names just make you go cross-eyed. So look that up if you don't read anything else in those list of names. That's a good couple of verses to look through. So the next section talks about the Levites. They are recorded in detail because they represent the line of Israel's priests. Now, again, as some of God's people returned to Jerusalem after their exile, they were going to need to rebuild the temple and reestablish their worship of God. So it was important that there was some sort of record to be able to identify the priestly descendants. Per the law of God given to us in the Pentateuch, it was supposed to come from the Levites. Priests were supposed to be Levites, and you couldn't just make a random person a priest. But not every Levite was a priest. So every priest had to be a Levite. Not every Levite was a priest, if that makes sense. Some of the Levites were also musicians. Some of them had jobs of taking care of the objects in the tabernacle when there was still a tabernacle. So that not every single Levite's a priest, but the priests had to come from that family. Then chapter 9 records the exile and its aftermath. And so they list the names of the people who returned to Jerusalem. It's a pretty small list. Not everybody returned. Most people stayed in the regions where they had been exiled. So a lot of them remained in Babylon. When we get to that time period, that's the story of Queen Esther. She is an Israelite who is in Babylon. They also migrated to other areas in the ancient Near East. We call all of that the diaspora, anywhere outside of Jerusalem or Galilee. So the genealogies end with a listing of Saul and his descendants, which then leads us to where we left off in 1 Samuel, the death of Saul. So now we're caught up. Chronicles is caught up to where we ended in the stories of the books of Samuel and Kings. So note that although Saul lost God's anointing, his family endured and lived in Jerusalem. Typically, if something like that were to happen, the king's entire family line would be cut off. A lot of times the next king would kill intentionally any remaining children of Saul, any remaining sons, because they wouldn't want a threat to their throne. So that's kind of the brutal reality of the ancient Near Eastern world. But David is different. Remember that David made an oath with Saul to preserve Saul's family line. He made an oath with Jonathan to preserve Jonathan's family. And this is going to be a testimony to David's loyalty and honor that he does not kill all of Saul's remaining sons, although much tragedy still awaits the family of Saul. So chapter 10 gives us an account of Saul's death. It matches almost word for word the close of the first book of Samuel. We do note that Chronicles does not tell us anything about Saul's reign as the first king of Israel. He shows up in the genealogy, and then we get the story of his death. We don't get the story of his murderous pursuit of David through the wilderness. All we get, the brief synopsis, 2 verses we get is this. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He did not keep the word of the Lord and even consulted a medium for guidance and did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. So that is consolidating a lot of history. Again, the authors of Chronicles, the editors putting this material together, they would have known that Saul's full story already existed in the book of, in the scroll of Samuel. So they didn't need to go into detail again. All they wanted to do was touch on the important points that Saul did not inquire of the Lord. Although we know from Samuel's book that actually Saul did seek God's guidance just prior to consulting the witch at Endor. But by then it was too little and too late. And I suspect that Saul couldn't discern God's voice because he hadn't cultivated a relationship with God. God is not a vending machine. You can't just push the button and expect him to respond. You can't expect to recognize God's voice if you've gone an entire lifetime without ever seeking knowledge of God or intimacy with God. Note that the chronicler also attributes Saul's death directly to God. He says that God put him to death. But we know, again, from 1 Samuel that Saul died by suicide. So this is that passive Hebrew usage that doesn't translate well into English. It's similar to the verbiage of 1 Samuel, where the writer says that God sent an evil spirit to torment Saul. But the idea is passive in nature. We know God didn't put Saul to death. There wasn't a lightning bolt that came out of the sky to kill Saul. Saul fell on his sword. But God did remove his anointing of Saul, which then removed God's blessing and protection, such that with each bad choice Saul made, he moved further away from God. Because he chose to not cultivate a relationship with God, Saul ended up in a bad way. God doesn't cause evil. That's what we, at least Methodists believe in our theology. But God also is sovereign, which means he does allow evil to exist. And he allows human beings to make evil choices, to choose evil over good if that's what they want, but not without ultimate consequences. It's interesting that although Chronicles feels quote unquote more positive, for whatever that's worth, than Samuel or Kings, when it comes to Saul, the chronicler is actually quite harsh. He leaves out any of the nuance that we could add to Saul's story because there were good things that Saul did during his reign. He isn't all bad. There's a lot that's complicating the story of Saul, including, I think, mental illness. But they just are going to sum it up as he didn't consult the Lord. He was unfaithful to God. And so kind of like he got what he deserved is how they are putting it forward in Chronicles. All right, so now we're matched up again in our timelines. We're going to go back to the books of Samuel, to the beginning of 2 Samuel, to look at what happens next for David. Interestingly, this part of David's story is not mentioned at all in Chronicles, and we'll talk about that when we go back to Chronicles. So in 1 Samuel closed with the death of Saul, David still living amongst the Philistines, having just rescued his people from the Amalekites who raided the camp of David and his men. So the first chapter of 2 Samuel is going to deal with David's reaction to that. So David is still not with his people. And remember that in the ending of 1 Samuel, it was unclear. Was David really going to turn against his own people when the Philistine king said, hey, come fight with us against Israel? Or at some point would he have revealed himself to be like a double agent or a spy and instead turned against Philistine? We don't find that out because the rest of the Philistine commanders said, we don't trust him. You need to send him back. Of course, when he got back, he found out that all of their families had been taken off into captivity by the Amalekites. His camp had been raided, and so they had to go and get their family back. So that is what they were busy doing while Saul was trying to battle against the Philistines and ultimately fell on his own sword. So after Saul and Jonathan and his other sons, a couple of other sons that were with him, died, Saul's army flees in terror. And that makes the way for the Philistines to invade and inhabit many of Israel's cities. So Israel is in a bad way, and David isn't even in his own country. So an Amalekite prisoner, so he says, escapes from Saul's camp to tell David of the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. Now, there's a lot that we have to surmise between the lines here. I suspect the man thought he was going to earn David's favor by reporting this news. Hey, David's living with the Philistines now. He probably doesn't like his own people. We know, probably everyone in the ancient Near East knew at this point that Saul was trying to kill David. And so I think he thought, I'm going to win David's favor and maybe he'll even elevate my status. And so he also lies and says that he was the one to kill Saul. Again, I think he thought he was going to get, made David's right-hand man because of this. But David remains ever loyal to Saul and Jonathan. He publicly mourns for the fallen and in fact crafts a beautiful lament to be memorialized for all Judah to sing. And then he kills the Amalekite because he believes the lie that the Amalekite killed Saul. So the next step is David's going to return to Judah. But chapter 2 begins with the phrase, in the course of time. So that suggests that the return was not immediate, that David mourned Saul and Jonathan properly before consulting God for the next step. And that is how they would have done it. They would not have moved forward without having a prescribed period of mourning. usually 7 days, but for high-ranking leaders within Israel, like a Moses type person, I think Moses, it was 30 days. So it could have been, anywhere from a week to a month that he mourned them. And then he was like, okay, God, now what comes next? So remember, that's going to be the big difference between David and Saul, is David will consistently consult God. So when David does, God sends him to Hebron. We've seen this city before. The name means friendship. This was the place where Abraham purchased the first piece of promised land to be owned by one of God's people. It was also the city given to the faithful spy Caleb. It was both a Levitical city, so Levitical priests lived there, and it was also a city of refuge. Remember, cities of refuge where people would flee for manslaughter, to be proven innocent, and to have refuge so that the family of whoever they killed did not take revenge against them. So this city is an ideal place for David to begin his reign, and it's also within his native tribal territory because he is from the tribe of Judah. So here David is officially anointed king, but only over the tribe of Judah, his own people. Becoming fully accepted as king by the rest of Israel is going to take longer, 7.5 years, because there's going to be a challenge to David's reign. And so this is the majority of this sort of opening story about the reign of King David. So this will take us from chapter 2, verse 8 of 2 Samuel to chapter 4, verse 12. So Saul had other sons that were not with him in battle, and one of those sons is Ishbosheth. And he is encouraged by the commander of Saul's army, Abner, to try to claim the throne of Israel. Now, my guess is that the reason Ishbosheth didn't go to battle with his father was because he's younger. We get that impression as well because he really seems to be at the mercy of what Abner wants to do. Abner uses Ishbosheth like a puppet to take control. Ishbosheth's name means man of shame. It's not his birth name. His birth name was Eshbaal, which means man of Baal. Both names are problematic. Man of Baal is one of the main gods, little g gods that they worshipped in the ancient Near East. He was the god of the Canaanites. We've seen his name before. And the fact that he was named after him probably means that his mother was not an Israelite, or that at this point, not only was Saul not, that's the wrong word. Not only was Saul plagued with mental illness, with this demonic spirit, with his evil choices, but perhaps is worshiping other gods, or at the least married to women who are worshiping other gods. There's no indication of that in Saul's story. We never directly see him see that he's said to worship other gods. Yes, he consults the witch at Endor, but he does so to call up Samuel. But this is certainly evidence that maybe that was the case. And it's interesting because someone in Bible study discussion brought that up. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't think Saul worshipped other gods. But now I see where she had seen it written somewhere. And I'm seeing where someone might believe that and have evidence for that because he named his son Man of Baal. So anyway, his name gets changed to Ishbosheth, which is how they're going to refer to him in 2 Samuel, man of shame, because of what he does. But at the same time, I kind of feel for him because I think he was young and impressionable and didn't know what to do. And you're even going to see David has a heart for this poor guy because, you'll see. We'll get there. So anyway, Ishbosheth, Abner takes him to Mahanaim, which is east of the Jordan River. So way back when in Genesis, we talked about the significance of east and west. And that east, often for a human, when they go in the eastward direction, it's a backward step. So I think that's interesting that he ends up going east of the Jordan River. And there, Abner makes Ishbosheth king of the rest of Israel except for Judah. But note in the language, it does not say he's anointed. Only God can ordain someone to be anointed, and only the proper leader from Israel can anoint someone. You can't just up and decide, hey, I like this guy better, I'm going to anoint him king. So Abner makes. So this points to human power, human will. Abner very much going off script here and doing what he wants versus, consulting God. And so Ishbosheth is going to rule over king of everybody but Judah for 2 years. Now, you might recognize that there's a potential discrepancy here in the numbers, because we read that David is king of just Judah for 7.5 years, but Ishbosheth is king of the rest of Israel for 2 years. So those numbers don't add up. Many believe that he was not made king of Israel until 5 years after the death of Saul, so that it took some time. And so it's the end of David's reign that's going to overlap with Ishbosheth's 2-year reign. That could be true. I don't know. But I will also say this could be entirely symbolic. Numbers in the Bible are symbolic. And so that number 7 means complete. It means godly. It would indicate that David is in the right. He's the one that has been anointed by God. The number 2 is incomplete. It means he's not been ordained by God. It's a human endeavor. And so that could completely be symbolic rather than actual numbers. And also both could be true. We just don't know for sure. And so I have a map here of the 2 locations of the seats of these kings. So Hebron is down closer to the Dead Sea, south of both Jerusalem, Bethel, south of Shechem, which is where the tabernacle originally was. And then Mahanaim is east of the Jordan River in the territory of those eastern tribes. So they're quite a bit a ways from each other and separated by the river. The battle for the throne resulted in a bloody civil war between David and his general Joab and Ishbosheth and his general Abner. Really, it's David versus Abner. Because again, Ishbosheth is just kind of there in name, and it's really Abner pulling the strings. So they have a battle at Gibeon, and there Abner ends up killing Joab's brother, Asahel, who tries to pursue Abner. So Asahel tries to pursue him. At one point, Abner is like, "What are you doing? Stop pursuing me." And then he ends up killing him. So eventually the 2 sides go their separate ways. After this happens, they kind of separate, take a time out. This is how warfare was in ancient times, even in like the time of our Civil War in America. Like they would have breaks where they didn't fight. Like, it's a weird thing. And so we learned that the casualties from this initial battle were much higher for the army of Ishbosheth. And this is, I think, the first battle when they like decide they're going to put their men up against each other in hand-to-hand combat. It's just some of the stuff that they do is wild in these days. In addition, after this, Ishbosheth accuses Abner of sleeping with Saul's concubine. And Abner denies this. We don't know if it's true or not, and he's denying it, but he really did it. But whatever the case, Abner's so mad that he changes his allegiance. And he calls to David and says, "I'm going to support you now. I'm going to help make you king of all Israel." So despite all the fighting, we get a real quick little paragraph about David and all the sons that are born to him and the other wives that he amasses during this time period. And so he manages somehow to marry more women, also to secure some concubines, and they bear him sons in Hebron. But his first wife, Michal, who is Saul's daughter, remains behind enemy lines. So he would have not laid eyes on her since his flight from Saul began. Remember, she and Jonathan help him to escape, and then he hasn't seen her since, presumably. So when Abner agrees to come over to David's side, David says, "Fine, but my one condition is bring me Michal." So we learn that she has remarried and that she and her husband are not happy about this. Her poor new husband follows Abner and Michal, and he's crying the whole time until Abner's finally like, "What are you doing? Go away." More to come for this story. She's going to show back up later. So, although Abner pledges loyalty to David, this is not enough to spare him from the vengeance of Joab. So, Joab is David's general. Abner had killed his brother, and so he's been out for blood ever since. So, even though Joab knows that David has made peace with Abner, he doesn't care. And so he tells David, you know what, I think it's just a ruse. And I'm sure he's saying this because he doesn't want to let go of that vengeance. He wants to kill Abner. And when we have vengeance like that, a lot of times we'll say and do anything to justify it. And so Joab does end up killing Abner, and David is not happy. He distances himself from the situation, and he proclaims that Abner's blood is not on David's head. David says, I had nothing to do with this. This order did not come from me, and I'm horrified that this happened. He proclaims public mourning for Abner. He accompanies his body to the tomb. He fasts publicly, and all of that earns him the respect of the people of Israel. They realize that David, at least at this point in time, is a good guy. He's not trying to make this civil war worse. He is trying to honor his commitments of loyalty to Saul and Jonathan and his family. And he has really learned his lesson from the wicked Nabal and his wife Abigail. And so he knows that he needs to leave vengeance up to God. And so he says, I'm going to leave further vengeance against Joab and Joab's brother Abishai, who helped him in Abner's murder. He says, I'm going to let that be God's to deal with. And guess what? It's dealt with. So 2 of Ishbosheth's men murder Abner. Right, where am I? 2 of sorry, I'm getting lost too in these names. 2 of Ishbosheth's men murder Ishbosheth and bring his head to David, once more mistakenly believing that this is going to please him. But David mourns for Ishbosheth, just as he did for Abner, just as he did for Saul and Jonathan and the other sons. He calls him an innocent man, and he buries his head in Abner's tomb. And David has the 2 murders killed and publicly displayed in Hebron. So again, David is remaining loyal to Saul and his oath with Saul that he himself would not harm any of Saul's descendants, nor is he going to tolerate anyone else that harms Saul's descendants. He cuts off the hands and feet of the dead men. This was a common ancient Near Eastern practice to show a permanent disabling of one's enemies and total defeat and shame. Their hands were cut off because they were used to murder, and their feet were cut off because they were used to bring Ishbosheth's head to David. It's at this point in time that we learn of a surviving son, Mephibosheth. His name means dispeller of shame, so that's interesting because Ishbosheth meant, shameful. And we learn that he was crippled as a 5-year-old when his nurse tried to flee Saul's home with him after she learned of the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. Mephibosheth will be featured again in David's story. But for now, Saul's family has not been completely wiped out, as David has promised. So finally, David becomes Israel's king. And once the bloody years of war have ended, all the tribes of Israel acknowledge his rightful anointing as king. I think it very much helped that he publicly mourned all of these figures. Israel, they loved Saul despite his madness. He was the king that they chose, that they backed from the beginning. And so had David come out and been like, oh, that Saul was so terrible and he deserved to die, he would not have gotten as much loyalty as he did. But because of his actions, he receives the loyalty of the people, and he is anointed king. We're treated to more symbolic numbers here. So the Bible tells us that David is 30 when he becomes king. That's a multiple of 3. 3 means divine wholeness, and he reigns 40 years. 40 signifies period of testing, trial, purification, and preparation. He reigns over Judah 7.5 years, and over all Israel 33 years. So I would submit to you that those numbers are very much symbolic and not meant to be taken literally. If you just tried to add it up alone, like he's maybe in his 30s when he becomes king, but 30 seems a little bit young. It depends on how long he was actually fleeing from Saul and how old he was when that began. So if we look at or talk about some interpretive analysis from this portion of the story, what we see is the importance of communal grieving. Upon hearing of Saul's death, David does not celebrate as we might imagine that he would. Now he doesn't have to run from Saul any longer. You would think he would celebrate, but he doesn't. He mourns, and he does so publicly. He invites the rest of Israel to join him in mourning via his song for Saul and Jonathan. This is a good lesson for us because in many communities in modern times, grieving has been moved to the private realm. It used to be, even in this country, in the United States, where I'm from, that people would wear dark colors for a certain time period, depending on how close you were to the deceased. Like a widow would wear black for a year. They would cover mirrors. They would have something on their door so that you would know that someone was mourning. We don't do that any longer. Many people these days don't even have funerals, or they don't go to funerals, or they postpone them far past the date of their loved one's death. And for many funerals, most of the funerals I've officiated, the body of the deceased is not present. So our mourning rituals have changed tremendously to make grief more private and almost more sanitized in a way. And not that there's wrong with any of those specific actions, just to say as a whole, we're moving away from the public grief. Now, it does depend on your community, on your faith background, on where you live. For instance, we have Jewish friends, and he just lost his mother. His mother just died, and they still sit Shiva. The family sits for a week. It used to be with the body. I don't think they do that anymore, but they do sit in they go to someone's house for a week, and the people of the community come to visit. They bring food, they come and talk, they care for the family, and the family just literally sits for that entire week and does nothing. And that's a communal type of grieving, and I think it's a beautiful practice, and I wish we did things like that, at least in the background that I come from. The opening of the book of 2 Samuel shows us how important this is to grieve publicly and in community. One scholar writes, "It is as important to sing publicly of our hurts as it is to sing of our triumphs. It is only by acknowledging the depths of loss that we can open to God's new thing in our midst." David sings Israel to an acknowledgement of loss that will allow them to surrender Saul as a future that can no longer be. I thought that's such a beautiful way to say it. He sings Israel to an acknowledgement of loss that allows them to surrender the future they hoped for with King Saul. That's so important. We grieve not just the person, our loved one that dies, we grieve the future that will never be because they have gone on. And we need to do that. We need to do that. And it helps to have people know that and to see it and to witness it. And then we're not so uncomfortable when it comes into our own sphere, because at some point in time, we will all grieve. We will all grieve. We will all lose people that we love. We will all lose other things in life. And it's okay to not be okay. It's important to grieve. And it is important to let people know. You can let people know. Now, you don't want to stay in a space of public, deep mourning forever, because that's where we can grow bitter. But it's okay, and it's okay if it takes a while. And it's not a straightforward path. Grief is very circular. It circles back on itself. It comes back up when we least expect it. And that is all okay. And it is okay to say to people, I'm grieving today, but you know what? I want you to know that I'm grieving and I'm sad. And you can say that. You can say that. And it helps people to know sometimes. It's better that than to put on, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. So to continue talking about communal grieving, the same scholar wrote this, which is also well said. The church should be the place where death can be faced for the painful reality that it is, and where our human loss and grief can be voiced. As followers of Jesus Christ, we don't mourn without hope. We know that. We believe in God's promise that we will be back together again one day in the timelessness of God's presence in eternity, in a place where there will be no more grieving or mourning. But that doesn't remove the fact that it still hurts here and now. It is a painful reality. It is okay to not be okay. And we need a place to voice that. We need a place to be honest and vulnerable, and where people will come alongside us and say, I will sit with you. I will sit Shiva, whether physically or mentally or spiritually, but I will support you in your time of grief. We can normalize this process again in our own communities, just as David did for Israel. The other thing that stands out is this notion, which we talked about a little bit last week in our Bible study discussion. Authority is not a blank check. Just because God has anointed someone to do something does not mean that he's then like, go do it. Whatever you want to do, it's all good because you're my anointed. One of the biggest differences, I keep saying this, between David and Saul is that David often consults God and he nurtures a relationship with God. And we know this especially when you look at the book of Psalms. We're not doing Psalms in this chronological study because it's really hard to do that. The Psalms are encompassing the entirety of Israel, but we did read them during our break for the Christmas holidays if you're following real time. So if you're following not in real time and you come across this months or years later, just at some point, maybe take a pause and go look at Psalms, or even now as you're reading this, like flip through some of the Psalms, because you will see David's grief, you will see his voice shine through there, and you will see the fact that he does nurture this relationship with God. Saul nurtures a relationship with religion and Samuel, and only consults God when the religious tools he has relied on are no longer available. When followers of Jesus act in leadership, even in in your homes or in any capacity, we should remember that in God's kingdom, our leadership is a shared role. It's not a blank check. Even if we're parents, our children are not a blank check that we get to do anything with we want. We have to be accountable to God first and foremost, and to one another. That's how we prevent getting corrupted by the power that leadership carries with it. Which leads us to another thought, the intersection of power and violence. David's rise to the full throne of Israel is bloody and tragic, and it reminds us that power is never far from violence or the temptation to violence. But with God, human leaders absolutely can rise above brutality, violence, manipulation, and the pursuit of self-interested goals. We see this at the beginning with David, as he holds accountable the men who killed Ishbosheth and, the man who falsely claims to have killed Saul. We can and should hold responsible people who condone violence for their own profit, fame, or pleasure. That is never a good sign when any leader does that. We know that they are giving in to the temptations of power. One scholar wrote that God's kingdom stands as the alternative to human kingdoms ruled by violence and self-interest. And, this is a question I have for you in discussion, but how do we, when we do have positions of power and influence, how do we keep from being absolutely corrupted by it? It is by nurturing a daily surrendered relationship with God and realizing that we are accountable to God first and foremost, but we are also accountable to one another, to our communities. And when we lead on behalf of God for the benefit of everybody, not just for us. And David, I think, starts off really well with that perspective. It's not going to last, unfortunately, but in the beginning, he really does have a heart for the people. So God's promise is finally fulfilled, but it took a while. When David is finally recognized as the true king of Israel, that promise that God gave when Samuel anointed him long ago in the field where he had been shepherding is fulfilled. And we can wonder if David ever doubted that it would be so, because a lot of time passed between Samuel anointing David and David being anointed by all Israel. This is the truth of God's timing. Sometimes his promises take a while to come true. One of the reasons is that God often works in and through other dusty human beings. And we don't always get that right. He weaves us all together in this big picture of divine love and grace, and he allows us to be part of what he's doing in the world. And so he has to wait on us because we are limited, dusty human beings, and he is very patient. So sometimes things take a while, especially when he's working through other people. The lesson for us in the story of David's early years is to be patient, trust God, continually consult God as to where and when and how we can join God in the work of bringing all of his promises to fruition. Where are you at work, God, and how can we join you in that work? That's the daily task. And if we do that and trust God, God's promises will be fulfilled for you and for me. We also note that in the fulfillment of God's promise to David, God shows that this story is not just about David, it's about all of Israel. God cares for his people. God cares for all creation. God cares for every single human being that has ever lived or will ever live. In David, they're going to have a king who desires a mutuality of care amongst God's people. He's not going to hoard everything for himself. He's not going to go do things for his own glory most of the time. We'll see a few instances, but that's going to be later. At the beginning, he's really going to have this. We see it. We've already seen it when he plunders the Ammonite camp, the people that took his family from the Philistine city. Remember that story? And he brings the people back and he takes all their plunder and he sends some of it to Judah. And he gives some of the plunder even to the men that stayed behind that were too tired to go to battle. And he makes that a lasting ordinance. So there's a fairness there. There's a sharing. We're doing this not just for me. He could have kept all the plunder for himself as the leader. And he didn't do that. He shared it. And he shared it with people that weren't even there. He's a true shepherd all the way through. Now he's going to make mistakes. And he's going to sin pretty badly. He's dusty. We are all dusty. But at his heart, he remains that shepherd who cares for his flock, who would give up his own life for the sake of those he leads. So putting it all together, now you will read 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through 10. The majority of that is names. So feel free to skim those names if that's overwhelming to you. As I said, pay attention to that prayer of Jabez. It's just 2 short verses in chapter 4. And then the final chapter deals with the death of Saul. And so that's a good one to read as well. And then you'll turn to 2 Samuel and you will start in chapter 1 and you will stop reading in chapter 5, verse 5. When you get to David being made king of all Israel, that's the point at which we're going to stop. And then the next lecture is going to take up the early years of his full reign when he's the full king of Israel. So for discussion questions, please visit my website. I won't have those ready yet, but by the next lecture, I will. This is a 2-week module. If you're following me real time and you're in my discussion group, we will meet this coming Friday for discussion, but then the next Friday, I'm going to be out of town, so we won't meet. And so we'll just get through the questions at whatever point in time y'all have gotten to in your reading. But if you need even more than 2 weeks, that's okay too. We'll see how it goes and I'll gauge how you're doing when we meet this coming Friday. Just a heads up, if any of you listening are anywhere near the Woodlands and in Texas, and again, you're listening to this in real time, I'm going to be preaching at the Woodlands Methodist Church. God willing, hopefully the weather will be good. I know it's terrible right now, but by February 8th, hopefully it will be all right. So Sunday, February 8th, Super Bowl Sunday, I'll be in the Woodlands preaching in all 3 of their traditional services. So you can tune in online, or if you're able to come in person, I would love to see you. And if I haven't met you face to face, meet you. So that's what's coming in the next couple of weeks here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you've enjoyed this lecture, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and give the video a like if you would. And if you have even more time, a comment. That really helps these to get seen and put into the, algorithm or whatever it is. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you for being here. And again, next lecture, we're going to look at the first half of David's reign And then the third lecture for David's life is going to cover his final years and kind of when things get messy and kind of dusty. So looking forward to that. Let us close in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for the truth that all your promises come true. You fulfill your word always. So Lord, give us the patience to wait on your timing. Give us the strength to carry on, to move forward as we can in your strength, God. Help us to see where you are at work and to have the courage and the willing heart to join you in that work, how you want us to, not on our terms, but on your terms. Lord, may we drink deeply from the cup of your will. May we surrender everything to you each and every day. And may we truly go out and be your hands, feet, ears, eyes, voices, and bring hope to the darkness. We love you, God, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. And just a final note, I think last lecture I talked about my son Carson. He is at Army Basic Training. We just heard from him today. Good news, he is going to be medically discharged. It's going to take a while. Nothing moves quickly in the Army. So it might be a month, even 6 weeks, even up to 2 months before he gets back home. But hopefully we'll get him back in relatively one piece. He is finally having some healing in his left leg where he has the fracture, but his right leg is hurting even worse. I think it's because he has to put all his pressure on that leg. He has to go upstairs and downstairs twice a day for hygiene, for showering and getting ready in the morning, and then when he sleeps. And there's no way to get up those steps except with crutches. And when you have one leg that's fully broken, that's so dangerous in and of itself, just to try to attempt going upstairs. They don't have like any kind of handicap accessibility where he is. So he's injuring that other leg, I am sure. So please just pray, if you would, for his protection, that, he will continue to heal, that he won't suffer any worse damage. And just in the name of Jesus Christ, that this process would be expedited as much as possible, because the sooner we get him home and healed, the sooner we can figure out his next steps. He will be able to go back to the Army if he wants. He'll just have to start all over again, which means going through all the testing, having to do physicals, having to meet a recruiter, all that again. And then he would have to start from the beginning of basic training. So he doesn't know quite yet what he's thinking. His focus is just on making it through this time. He's in a room staring at a wall all day long, no books, nothing to do. And that's going to be the case until he comes home. So we're just praying for his mental health and for his physical health, and that God would part the waters of the seas and let the Army get all the red tape taken care of so that he can come home. As soon as they're able to get all the paperwork done, they can send him home. So thank you for joining me in that prayer. I will keep you posted. If you're not following me in real time, I will update on this story. Perhaps by the time you listen, all will be well and he will be home. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your prayers. I also appreciate your patience and your grace. This has been a hard month for us. We also lost my husband's grandma, who we were very close to, and it's just been hard. I have been sad a lot. I'm definitely not okay, but I'm also okay. God is with me. I feel your prayers. I have peace. I feel God's presence, but I'm also just having a hard time. So if these lectures are a little bit slow and coming out, please forgive me. Know that I am working on them, and that it's been a hard time for me. So thank you. Love to all of you. Thank you for your prayers. And please always let me know if there's anything I can be praying for you. It's such a privilege to be able to pray for one another. All right, friends, I'll see you for the next lecture. Until then, take care.